Welcome, everybody, and hello. I'm pleased to be kicking off the Fall SciComm Essential Series with the Public Engagement with Science team at the Kavli Foundation. I'm Jeannie Garbarino, and I've been hosting the Kavli SciComm Essentials series. The goal of this series is to connect Kavli scientists from across the globe with opportunities to build skills and around effective and inclusive science communication. In particular, by connecting the attendees, which is all of you, with experts in science communication. But before we get into our session, I just want to lay a few norms and ground rules for the Kavli SciComm Essential Series. We are asking those of you who are coming from Kavli Institutes to just change your name to reflect which Kavli Institute you might be joining us from. So hello from the Rockefeller Kavli Neural Systems Institute for me. I will change my name when I'm done with the spiel. This helps us all who are in the room to understand who's coming from the broader Kavli SciComm community. There's a lot of Kavli Institutes, and it's just nice to know who's in the room. Additionally, I want to remind everyone that we have Kavli convening principles, which Lauren has linked in the chat. And to briefly summarize, we ask everyone here to make space for different perspectives as we go deeper and take our friends along with us. All right, so let's get into today's topic. So we have two incredible experts who will show us how to give a good talk through both the lenses of cultural relevance, as well as through the lens of effective talk structure and visual presentation. First, we have Monica Feliu Mujer, who grew up in Puerto Rico, where her love for biology was ignited by a childhood spent surrounded by nature. As a bilingual scientist with a PhD in neurobiology, she has transitioned into a science communicator. Drawing from her background as a woman from a working-class rural family in Puerto Rico, Monica is passionate about engaging historically marginalized communities, especially Puerto Ricans and other Spanish speakers, with science. Monica uses a cultural lens in her storytelling, whether through filmmaking, writing, or media, to make science more equitable and inclusive. She works to challenge stereotypes about scientists of color and collaborates with community leaders to empower them in using science to address their specific needs or priorities. Thi Nguyen is dedicated to connecting people, creating engaging videos about scientists and science careers, and fostering inclusive learning environments. She leads programs on strategic thinking, inclusive leadership, public speaking, and transitioning between sectors. With expertise in learning and development, neuroscience, and presentation coaching, Thi supports global clients, universities, and organizations in developing outcomes that benefit both employers and students. A committed advocate for culturally sensitive and accessible programming, Thi is also a career coach, nonprofit volunteer, and board member, regularly speaking at national and international events. So off to you. Thanks so much, Monica and Thi, for being with us today. And I'll hand it over and be listening intently to the amazing lessons we are sure to learn.
Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you for the invitation. And thanks to Lauren and Melina for all of the support as well. We're really excited to have this conversation with you all today. It's going to be interactive, so be prepared to share in the ways that might be comfortable to you, either in chat or you can unmute. I kind of wanted to start us off with a little warm question, which is, do you have a presentation you're preparing for? Put it in the chat, let us know. Or if you're here just because you like to learn and you're curious what today is going to cover, let us know. Put it in the chat or you can unmute. Both. Thank you. Both as well. A presentation next week. Okay. A big international presentation, and they're very nervous about it. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you for sharing. As we get started today, I'll share my screen. There'll be some videos, and we also have an activity for you all to work through in a Google slide if you're open to it. But Monica also has 2 talks on Thursday. Okay. So to get started, kind of wanted to bring about this conversation of what is a presentation. And we'll talk about presentations and how to incorporate storytelling into them, what elements work really well, how to do that in a very simple way to identify places that you can just infuse a little storytelling to make a big difference, since we're all short on time. And then Monica will share some cultural relevant strategies, and then we'll kind of weave it all together. So to start, wanted to say that, your presentation is a shared experience. And I say that in the same way that you might go to a cooking show rather than reading a recipe. A cooking show gives you a little bit insight into, whenever they say add this ingredient to this ingredient, but you get to see how it's done and you understand why it's done that way, and maybe why those ingredients are important to the chef. And it's the same thing. You go to a presentation rather than maybe read the paper or present a grant, because you get a little bit of those insights. I often go to talks because I want to take something back with me, something that I've learned, and either incorporate it for myself or teach others, right? To share that knowledge and spread the wealth of what our community is doing. And so when you think about shared experiences, then there's a couple ways to kind of bring that together as you're giving your talk. So for example, any intro, we'll start with the intro, and then we'll talk about, the middle of the work, and then the ending. This is a typical intro. You're going to talk about what you know, what you don't know, and benefits to society. And this is a very simple intro that you can do for your grants and for your talks, right? And I chose this picture because it's a bridge. You're wanting to take them into this city or this area that you love and you have expertise in, and you want to show them around. But what's different between an intro for a grant or a paper and an intro for a talk is that an intro for a talk is also going to include how you're connected to the story. Maybe insights that you've had about doing that work, or working in the field, or working with those particular methodologies or patients even. And also they want to see how the sauce is made, right? Whenever they say that you are collecting those images, maybe you're talking about how you were collecting them all night in the dark, and people can relate to that. They can relate to how you had to, the rigorousness of it, the time it takes, and being able to share that helps to connect you to the audience members too. So when you're able to do that, it creates this arc. And this arc is a very familiar concept that is taught. They call it the story arc, the narrative arc, if you will. It comes from, very basic storytelling. My 4th grade daughter was taught this as well, right? You're going to start with some sort of a beginning. You have the conflict and the insights that you're sharing. Then you have some solution. This is usually where people talk about the data, and ta-da, this is what I found. Look at this beautiful, blot or graph or these images that we were able to collect. And then the part that people most often forget that really closes it out is actually the ending. And the ending, that vision for the future, whatever that looks like, and we'll talk about how to do that really well, is really satisfying. And you see this when it's done well in other fields, right? Like when you're watching a comedian or some sort of stand-up, and it's called a callback. They have some detail that they have in the beginning, and as they tell their jokes at the end of the story, they call back to that detail. It's really satisfying for an audience member to hear. So think about how we're going to introduce like how you might do that. And also in depositions, right? I have a friend who works in a law firm, and they were doing a mock jury. And she said that one of the teams, they presented this story at the beginning of the trial, at the mock trial, and at the end of it, and being able to connect all those pieces helps people to follow along and say, yes, I understand the story. There's some sort of completeness to it. And so to set this up, first of all, we're going to put the bones together, and we're going to talk about who is it that you're talking to, the audience. What is your goal? Do you know why you're there? And what is your message? And how the message isn't just what is it, but like, why does it matter? And so this is what it might look like. So we're going to do an exercise all together. So get ready to be near a chat if you can. So we're going to prepare for 2 typical audiences that you might be interacting with. There's the expert audience, and that might include people in your lab or in your department or your work group. People have familiar vocabulary, understanding of the methodologies that you're using. And then non-expert. And non-expert will include other populations. Maybe you're speaking at a stargazing night, or maybe you're speaking at a public event at a museum or something like that. Or Thanksgiving, holiday dinner. That's also family, right? So, and so how do we set this up using this art that we just talked about? So when you're thinking about setting up for a conversation, you're actually thinking about all these things. And it's, what are your findings? What are the data? How did you get them? Right? The experimental conditions. Maybe it's the rigor. How many times did you do it? What were your controls? Then what are your steps? What's the group's next steps? What's the scientific message? What is the goal of it? Is there a clinical goal? Is there some sort of other goal, like a community goal? What are the benefits? What's the feedback if you're seeking feedback? What is the landscape of the field? Do you know what gaps you're filling? Who cares about this? Who is going to have a stake in what you're saying and the studies that you're doing? How can it be applied? What decisions are made? And what have you accomplished? And I like to lay this all out because a lot of times it's unspoken. It sets here in your brain. Like, these are all the things that I have to cover. And when it comes to expert and non-expert audiences, you are actually selecting different information based on assumptions that you're making. So we're going to lay this out. Okay, so for an expert audience, we're going to talk about, what are your assumptions? Knowing those assumptions, what do you present? And then we're going to talk about where you present them, right? So for example, I'll start us off. An assumption that you make whenever you're talking to an expert audience is that they have a similar level of knowledge as you do, that you can take some shortcuts and some liberties with the background, maybe even some acronyms. Although you should always spell out your acronyms at least the first time. So go ahead and write in the chat. Tell me, what are other assumptions that you're making whenever you're presenting to an expert audience, and how does these assumptions affect what information you present? And put it in the chat, or you can unmute if you'd like. I'll take a look at the. Right. Let's see here. I've lost my chat box.
There's nothing in the chat yet. I'm keeping an
Oh.
eye on.
Okay. If you're giving a talk like a RIPS talk, what are some assumptions you're making? All right, here we go. Some techniques to look for dark matter in our universe are well known in community of experts. So your toolkit, your techniques that you're using. Okay, you can also assume that experts know your acronyms, your general context, but not necessarily your exact topic, right? And you're assuming they are interested in what you have to say, right? Right. I think maybe there's an assumption that they understand where the field is right now too, right? Something a little bit broader. So based on that, what might you present from the menu? Let me go back to the menu. What are things that you'll definitely need to touch base on? Or where would you start? Oh, there's assumptions that they're going to be critical of your work, right? That you have to share how rigorous you were. For sure. Okay, so based off of these assumptions that we're making, here's what I propose goes into a talk for experts, right? First of all, we talked about audience, message, and goals. So we covered audience, and that's an expert audience. What is your goal? Typically for these kinds of talks, like a RIPS talk or like a lab meeting presentation, you're trying to get feedback on what you're doing. So your goal is to see if you're on the right track, see if you did the methodology correctly, see if there's anything that you haven't considered to add in, right? You're thinking about making progress on your work. So your goal typically is to share your research and get some feedback. So with this in mind, the things that you're going to want to focus on is just a reminder of the problem. What is the model you're working with? And so you can, skim a little bit of the background because there's an understanding. You're still going to want to touch base on what it is, but just a reminder of it. And then you can go right into your core findings and methodologies. Here are the data that I've got. You don't need to necessarily explain how you got the data or what the methodology was, unless it's a new methodology that you're introducing. And then the thing that you want to do is your next steps, and not in the sense of here are my specific aims, like these are the things that I'm doing 2A, 2B, 2C next, but like, what is it that you hope to accomplish and what information will you gain? Like I'm thinking that if I do this, then I can get that, figure 4 and we can get this manuscript on the road, right? Something about where that information will help you in your next steps. Because that's also that bit of context can help with the motivation for people to give you feedback. Okay, so let's do another one really quickly. What about a non-expert audience? What are your assumptions there? Or what would you be sure to present that you don't present in an expert audience? Go ahead and put that in the chat. What are you definitely going to introduce? Okay, they definitely need more context, more basic principles, more background so they can follow your talk. The general topic, a bit of the history. Why do scientists care about it in an easy to digest way? Absolutely. Right. So a little bit more introduction, a little bit more of how does this relate to you? Why does it matter? All right. So based on this is what this could look like. So we know the audience is a non-expert audience. Your goal will be to help the audience members with their takeaways. Do they know what they're going to walk away with whenever they're done with this talk? And so in that thread, it's helpful to help relate it to them. So what is the relevance of the information? What is the context of the problem right now? Where is the field? Why are we asking these questions? Why is it important? And then potential benefits to society. What would they be able to take home and share with their family members? Or is there any like action items? A lot of the introduction is the steps to consider that. Why did you choose that particular assay? Or why did you look at it in this way? And are you incorporating any sort of thought about what the community is considering when you're making these considerations? I remember one time listening to a researcher in the Boston area, and they were doing some research on mosquitoes that they were going to test by releasing to a small community. And so they actually went in several times and had town halls and committee conversations before they decided on the timing and the communications for when it was going to happen and what was going to happen and for how long. They have to share that. Otherwise, if they were going to a conference and they were like, we went to this community, we're releasing mosquitoes, we got some data, people would be like, whoa, 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 whoa. Tell me what else you considered. And that helps to build trust with the researcher and helps to know where you're grounded. And whenever you're giving any sort of methodologies or talking about your core findings, like we were saying here, what are some easy to digest ways? So remember to talk about use analogies, use extended metaphors, right? Anything that helps with that deductive reasoning. Sometimes whenever you're talking about, if you're at you're doing like some stargazing and you're showing some pictures of, galaxies that you're finding or brown dwarfs or whatever it is that you're seeking, before you show the picture, if you're in a non-expert audience, maybe throw up a picture of a Where's Waldo and say, you're actually very familiar with this exercise of looking for very specific things in a sea of images. And then you're like, this is what I get to do, but this is what I'm looking for. And then throw up your image and say, this is the thing I'm looking for. It's kind of like the hat, right? And then this is the beach scene or whatever. And so kind of have that context where they're familiar with whatever task it is that you're performing. And then finally, that really satisfying arc at the end, show the takeaways and think about what the next steps might be for you and your group and how it might impact them. And so your message must also, so we talked a little bit about different types of audiences and goals. So your message must always include a why. Why do I care? Why am I there? And so one way I like to think about this is here. In this image here is another bridge. And you can think about your outline very simply as what is it that I'm trying to achieve? So what? Why does it matter? And now what? And so if you can do this successfully, you'll create a full picture, right? And it's emblematic of this image here. And I've gotten the chance to serve as a trainer for TEDx St. Louis speakers. And sometimes whenever we do the auditions, we have each person gets 1 minute to do their entire pitch, their what, so what, now what, right? In a minute. And we have a rubric, a grid that's like, what's their name? What's their topic? Why does it matter right now? And then like, how did they do? And you give them you grade them. And I tell you, it's really interesting. We did 2 hours of auditions one afternoon. And the researchers, when they were done, and I look for patterns because I can't help myself. And so when I looked back page to page, most often for the PhD researchers that were doing their pitch, I left blank, what is it they're talking about? Because we get right into the data, like this is why the data is so exciting, and you're like, okay, but what are you doing? Why does it matter? And so remember that those are really key. Without that, you're not going to cross the bridge. Your audience is going to be on the other side. They're going to be hanging out on the swings. They're not even going to come across the bridge with you. So remember to introduce that so people can take that journey. And so here's what it sounds like. So here's an example of an okay version of this. So in this example, I'm a postdoc at UCSF in the Chino lab. I study cappuccino, and how it functions in neurons in zebrafish. And these studies can lead to the development of therapeutics. Like that's pretty good. Maybe that's like holiday conversation. Here's what it could sound like if you're at a conference and you're wanting to get the attention of department members that you want to apply to for faculty. Oops, here we go. I'm a neuroscientist interested in how we interpret visual cues to make social decisions about safety. Well, tell me more about that. Right, I study how the loss of one protein can influence social behaviors in zebrafish. And these studies may help us understand loneliness in humans and how we can impact social, behaviors. Right. Something that's interesting about this is some of the details, right? Particularly in this middle box. I study how the loss of one protein can influence social behaviors. A lot of times we're like, well, the loss of protein A causes this. And you're like, isn't it so interesting that just the loss of one gene or one protein, you can see a difference? And so that's one way too, if you're thinking about a non-expert audience. In an expert audience, you could do that at some varying level. I think we've kind of all lost that shine. We're like, yeah, everybody studies protein. But this is really effective in non-expert audiences. Okay, so now it's your turn. We are going to give you a chance to start to fill this out, to write who your audience is going to be for an upcoming talk, what your goal is or your intention or your motivation, what your main idea is. This is the thing that's missing. Now, we won't go into breakout rooms. I think some people are like, oh, I'm getting ready to leave this talk. No. You'll stay here. You'll get to do this on your own. And remember to write that main idea because that's the thing that's missing. And then write your what is it that you're talking about? Maybe start with an observation. So what, why does it matter? And now what? And then you can leave this bottom part blank. We'll get to that after Monica's part of the talk. So here is the slide deck that you can go into. And what you'll do is, let me see here.
I just shared it in the chat.
Thank you. Great. So what you'll do is you'll just right click here. I think you can see my thing. Just right click here. And you can, where's the duplicate? Oh, over here, right here. Duplicate the slide. There you go. People are already getting it. And then you can change your background to make it yours if you're like, I'm feeling a little bit more purple. And then we'll just give you a few minutes to start working on this. I'll stop sharing my screen. And yeah, just take about 5 minutes to get started. You'll have more time to rework it and then add in your culturally relevant strategies. So this is just to get your brain started. And let us know if you have any questions. Feel free to write in the chat, either privately or publicly. All right. So as you're working through your slides, it's great. I can see the brainstorming happening in this way. I'm wondering if and I don't know if some of y'all took the outline and did it in another space, which is fantastic. I'm glad you're able to take it and make it your own. I'm curious if we would have a volunteer or two to share their slide quickly, just do a little read through. And it's okay if not. So if you're not, you're like, I'm not ready, team, maybe in the next phase.
You can do it if you want.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you, Elena.
So it's the slide number 5. You want me to share the screen? How do you want
I
to?
can do that. I'll go ahead and share slide 5. Okay. Okay, let me
Okay.
make it bigger. Is that okay? Is that big enough?
Yeah, I think it should be. So everybody, I'm Elena Pinetti. Nice meeting you all. So the audience will be an audience of experts. I'm a particle physicist, so I generally look for like new particles in the universe with like telescope data. And you might have heard of like James Webb Space Telescope. It was launched like a couple of years ago. So next week I will give like this presentation it's a group of experts, but it's kind of broad because there are like undergrad students and professors. So it's really like different level of knowledge. And the goal would be just to talk about my research. So it's just like a seminar. So here, the main idea, I wrote down the topic of the seminar. I don't know if that's what you meant, but that's what I gathered from your slides. So this is like diameter searches with this James Webb Space Telescope. While I was doing this, I was a bit unsure between the what and the so what. Because when you say that, was these a shared goals? The people there, they all care about their matter. So they're all there to just like listen about techniques that we can use to look for the matter particles. And that's also like why it matters to me. So it's also the so what. So that's why I was a bit unsure between the two. And then in the now what, this feels more like the future perspective. And in my research, I use one telescope, but there are many more. So the final message to the audience would be, this is just the beginning, and one can use all the available data and do much, much more in the future.
That's
So,
great. Thank you for sharing. Are you up for some impromptu questions and coaching?
Oh, you can, I'm not a shy person. You can
Excellent, excellent.
Put me on the spot, no problem.
Yeah, it'll be quick. I think, and also it'll help other people think about the way that they're doing their what and their so what and their now what. And so when you talked about what the difference between the what and the so what is, the so what is like, why would it matter? Why would it matter if we discovered what dark matter is and where it is? Why would that matter?
Well, that's a thing when you do like fundamental science, right? You always discover it afterwards. So, I mean, right now we think that 80% of the matter in the universe is dark matter, so it kind of matters because it exists, and we don't know what that is.
I think that's it. That's your sentence, right? 80% of the universe is dark matter, and we don't know what it is.
Yeah, that's why we're looking for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Or you could also be like, so what? As in like, why does it matter that you're using this? If you said if there's a dozen tools, why did you pick this one first? Right. And so it's a little bit of that insight into your thinking. If you're like, why did I pick this technique, this technology, this part of the question? Why did I pick this protein? Like something that gives that insight to like what it is that's your.
Okay, so in this case, there might be one that is better in the sense that with James Webb, we can look for a specific particle that we couldn't probe before.
Yeah.
So that would be more maybe the one on the
Exactly. That's one of the insights that you can like draw out. Like, why did I pick this right now? And you're like, well, we haven't been able to, but now because of the James Webb images, we're able to do this pairing that we've been waiting for 30 years, right? Like that kind of detail of like how long, how many, what did it think? Like, what is exciting to you about it? That's a part of what you want to infuse in.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Thank you for volunteering. So as we think about how to infuse those details, it's actually what I wanted to talk about next, which is like a strong hook. So just really quickly, I'm going to show you the first minute of a few talks. You can kind of see how they put together the what and the so what, with some sensory details or some shared experiences or some universal like curiosities. She goes on to talk about how she uses these techniques that were developed for astrophysicists and she's used as an astrophysicist. She used them to detect pollution and to consider how that might impact public health in cities. And so, right, her setup is really interesting. Like, I am an astrophysicist, and instead of saying like, this is the methodology I'm gonna show you, she's like, I have a flaw. I like to think about lots of things, and even the universe is not, is too small for me. But let me tell you how I turn this into the world around me, right? And so kind of like setting it up, giving you insight into how she thinks. Okay, here's another one. 1 minute from this is a 3-minute thesis. This is how Bryce sets up a question in his research. All right, here's another one. So what's been done really well, and I'll share the links for all of these, you can explore them on your own. And there's one more, but I wanted to be cognizant of how we're doing with time. They introduced the what and the why by trying to connect with the audience. Remember, like, why is it relevant to you? What are some common questions that we all might have about this topic, and bringing that to light? So in thinking about that kind of relevance, Monica's going to share about how to make it culturally relevant.
Right. Thank you so much, T, for the setup. Hi, everyone. I'm Monica, and what do I want to share here? Okay. Bear with me while I figure out how to do this. Okay. Can you see my slides? Perfect. You can't see my nose, you see my slides. Cool. Awesome. Okay. So T has already established that a presentation is an experience, it's a performance, and a critical part of that experience is connecting with your audience. We've already seen some really great examples of techniques that you can use to connect with the audience. Fundamentally, what you want to do is to have people connect with you, with your science, and why it matters. You want people to think, do, or feel something when they are watching your presentation. You may want them to wonder and ask more questions. You may want them to reach out to you for collaboration. You may want them to give you money so that you can continue doing your work. But to effectively connect with your audience, you need to go beyond just identifying your audience, saying like they're going to be undergrads, they're going to be professors in my field. You have to go into like who they are, their identities, and their culture, and that's what my part of the talk is going to focus on. Let's see if we can advance this. And so we are going to be talking about how to make your science culturally relevant to people. When I say culture, I mean languages, beliefs, customs, identities of an individual and a group of people. We all have them. And this is important because people's culture, their lived experiences, their identities, their values, their previous knowledge, meaning the things that they already know, it shapes their interest and their relationship to science, how they approach asking and answering scientific questions, how they understand and engage with science. And by taking all of these factors into account, both your audiences and your own, that's essential to be effective in communicating your science, no matter who the audience is, whether they're experts or whether they are non-experts, because we all have culture. Now, making science culturally relevant can help you meaningfully connect with any audience. It's also a really effective way to counter stereotypes, to promote a sense of belonging. And this is particularly true for folks that have been and are still marginalized in science, because let's remember that science and also science communication, it excludes and overlooks many experiences, identities, cultures, values, and ways of knowing, because the dominant culture in science and also in science communication is Western, is white, and from the global north, meaning the US, Europe, and Australia. And all of those perspectives shape how scientific institutions are built, how scientists relate to each other, how we present information. And because these dominant cultures that we may even not think about them because they are quote unquote the norm, but they establish the norms of science and of science communication. And what often happens is if you don't adhere to, if you're not from those cultures or you don't adhere to the cultural norms of those cultures, then you end up being excluded or marginalized, or being felt like you don't belong in science. And so when you think and you consider, you make culture a central part of your considerations, when you're doing science, and in the case of this specific workshop of science communication, you can counter some of these exclusions and promote diversity and inclusion in science. And again, I want to underscore everybody has culture, everybody has multiple identities. And so while this can help you bridge gaps with audiences that are marginalized in science or individuals that are marginalized in science, when you focus on making science relevant to the culture and the identities of your audience, that's going to help you connect with them regardless of who they are, even if they are from dominant cultures. And so I want to dive now into some strategies to help you communicate science in culturally relevant ways. I think some of the ones that T shared are already great examples. We saw several people talking about themselves as those conduits. Sometimes when you're talking to an audience, they may not be coming to your talk because of the science you're presenting. They may be coming to your talk because, you know, in my case, maybe I'm the first Puerto Rican scientist they ever have seen giving a talk, and that's what draws them in. And then I can talk to them about my science. And so you can use you as that point of connection, your story, your background, the languages that you speak, and we're going to talk about those things. So I'm going to share some examples of a few strategies. This is not a comprehensive list. There are many different ways to make science relevant to the culture and the context of your audience. So you need to do the work of identifying what are those elements, those cultural elements, those identities that are important to your audience, to then decide what is the best strategy for you. But the examples are from my own work, from the work of others, and hopefully they're going to help you understand this concept of culturally relevant science communication a little bit better, and how you can apply it to your own science communication. Okay, so the first strategy that I'd like to share is to make science practical and local, to essentially connect science to the immediate context and realities of people, of your audience. So this picture was taken about 7 years ago to the date, when Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico, which is where I'm from, causing the longest blackout in US history, because just for context, Puerto Rico is a colony or a territory of the United States, as some people will call it. Most people didn't have power. They didn't have water. And people have to regularly make 8-hour plus lines to get basic supplies like gas, water, soap for weeks. One of the challenges that arose in this situation is that hand washing, which is essential for preventing diseases, became really challenging. Education also became severely disrupted. Schools were closed for weeks and some were closed for months. And so my colleagues at Ciencia Puerto Rico, which is one of the nonprofits that I work with, and we bring together a large community of scientists to put it in service of people or in benefit of Puerto Rico. We collaborated with a local Boys and Girls Club to teach kids science in relevant ways so that they can continue their education post emergency. And here, what you see is a couple of kids who completed an engineering challenge to build a hand washing station that used little water and soap and no energy for this hand washing station. What this activity did was connect essential engineering and science concepts to what the kids were living at the moment, post Hurricane Maria, making science not just local to what their immediate context, but practical. It was solving a need that they had. Another strategy that we can use is finding common ground in values and shared beliefs and interests to help us connect with our audiences and even move past differences that we may have with an audience. A person's values, their ideas, their beliefs are principles that they use to guide their actions and determine what's correct, what's desirable, or what's moral. In this image, you see Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. She's a climate scientist, and she lives in Texas, where many people are more politically conservative than in other parts of the United States. And that political leaning correlates with skepticisms about things like climate change, for example, and Dr. Hayhoe is a climate scientist. And she has a book called Saving Us that I highly recommend. She has some really great science communication advice on it. And in that book, she shares an anecdote that illustrates how you can find common ground with audiences with whom you may not agree on everything. She talks about just finishing a talk in a rural part of Texas where they've been having less rain and more droughts, which is affecting agriculture, which is an economic lifeline in that region. And this is in part due to climate change. And she shares that as she is done with her talk, she's packing up her things. A woman approaches her and says, I agree with everything that you said. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially this person says, I agree with what you said. And I don't understand what those people talking about climate change mean when they say climate change. And of course, Dr. Hayhoe was talking about climate change, but she never used the words climate change in her talk. And she explains that she did this intentionally because she knows that that word may trigger skepticism in some people in her audience, because she understands the culture of that audience. She was able to talk about something that's quote unquote controversial and find agreement with people with how she presented this topic to the audience. The topic was fundamentally about climate change, but she knew which way to talk about it so that she could find common ground with people on a topic that otherwise people would shut down when she talks about this. Another strategy that we can use is to find ways to connect science to the life, the experiences, and identities of your audience. In this image, you see Dr. Danielle Lee. She is an urban ecologist. And this picture is from a tech talk that she gave a few years ago that I strongly recommend. And here she talks about how hip hop helped her as a student connect important ecological principles to her own life experiences as a Black woman from the South of the United States, and how today, as a professor and a researcher, she still uses hip hop song references to connect urban communities with science, because it intentionally connects science to things that people already know, things that people already love, and most importantly, who they are, and in a way that celebrates their contributions to scientific knowledge, which is especially important for these populations that are consistently excluded from science. What Dr. Lee does in this talk really brilliantly is that she leans into her identities and her life experiences and those of her audience to connect with them, to connect them with science, and to affirm that they do belong in science, even though they continue to be marginalized in those spaces. Yeah, another strategy you can use is, or another example rather, of this, of connecting science with the life experiences and identities of an audience is seen in a film called Decoding Ancestral Knowledge by the Science Communication Lab, which is another one of the organizations that I work with. In this film, we follow a Hawaiian microbiologist, Dr. Kiana Frank, and she uses clues, or she finds clues about nitrogen cycling in fish ponds, which is a really important ecological process between microorganisms, plants, and fish. She taps into oral or ancient oral narrative traditions of her Hawaiian culture to understand this process better. And I think this is a great example of how we connect science with life experiences and identities, because she uses the wealth of indigenous knowledge, of her cultural knowledge, in understanding the natural world. And she does it in a way that is respectfully combines that traditional knowledge with modern Western science techniques. And the film really showcases how a scientist's own culture and identities can drive their research and their innovation. Another thing that we can do is present a culturally similar role model, someone with similar identities or lived experiences of our audience, because this can help people see themselves succeeding in science, especially, again, folks from marginalized groups. It's important that we remember that one person has multiple identities. We all contain multitudes, and those identities intersect. And so for some folks, those identities can cause them to be marginalized in multiple ways at once. For example, a Black woman and other minoritized women can simultaneously experience sexism and racism, something that is in academic circles, it's called the double bind. And so having this awareness of our own identities or the identities of the examples that we're presenting, how they may intersect, how they may resonate with our audience, it can help us make science relevant to those people. So what you're seeing on the slide is, of course, Albert Einstein, I think the most recognizable scientific figure, and then really a pop culture figure around the world. And, I think it's a go-to example for many of us when we think of a scientist, or when we're presenting a scientist. Albert Einstein is perhaps one of the first examples that come to mind. And of course, everyone should know about Einstein. But an equally important role model, and that may be more relevant to people of certain and different identities, is Dr. Wanda Diaz-Merced, who you see on the right. She is a female Puerto Rican astrophysicist, and she also is blind. Wanda invented a way to turn her data into sound so that she and many other folks who are blind could do astronomy research, which is really a visual field. And so her example for many people who are Puerto Rican, who are Latina, who are women, who have functional diversity, may find her a more compelling and relevant and relatable role model than say Einstein. And so that's what I mean when I say we can think about role models that are going to better reflect or be more culturally similar to the experiences of our audience. And so another strategy that we can use is to communicate science in a person's first language. That can help make it more accessible and understandable, and thus more relevant to their lives. English tends to be the de facto language of science for very good reasons, but it also means that a lot of folks are excluded from learning about science, for having it be accessible to them. An example of how you might do this comes from Corey Gray and Sharon Yellowfly. So Corey is on the left, Sharon is on the right here in your image, and Corey works at LIGO, and I apologize, I can never remember what the acronym for this means, but it is an observatory that is used to observe gravitational waves, and I'm sure other things that I am not aware about. But Corey works at LIGO, and LIGO was instrumental in observing gravitational waves for the first time. He was actually in the room when that observation was made. And this was a huge observation. It made a big splash several years ago. It was in the news. When the time to announce this came about, Corey worked with his mom to translate the historical discovery of gravitational waves into the endangered language of the Blackfoot people, which is an indigenous group. To showcase, first to share this discovery in a language that Blackfoot people could understand. But I think what they did also showcases the importance of indigenous languages and of communicating science in an audience's language. And also their work allowed them to showcase how indigenous folks were part of this really, really important discovery for humanity. Another example of the importance of language in making science relevant comes from this video, from the Enter the Bioscience Lab Skills series. It's a course, T, correct me if I'm wrong, and this was actually created by T and her colleagues to equip aspiring scientists of all ages and backgrounds with skills, like foundational skills, to start their research lab journey. Now, they created videos in English, but importantly, in American Sign Language, or ASL. People who are deaf are severely excluded from science and many other spaces. So communicating science in American Sign Language, or ASL, makes science accessible to them, but it also, in this case, allows them to see themselves in science, because in the case of this course, they get to learn important scientific skills from a deaf person whose name is Denise. So I'm going to play this briefly. So, you can see it's really powerful to see. And for people who are hearing, for those of us who are hearing, at least for me, it's really humbling, honestly, to see how folks in other languages communicate science. In the case of ASL, this is a very physical, expressive language, but I'm always fascinated when I see or hear people communicate science in their language. In my case, Spanish is my first language, and so I often feel like I have two different personalities when I'm communicating, or when I'm speaking in Spanish and when I'm speaking in English. So there are many other elements of the humanity behind the science that can come through when you are conveying science in an audience's language. All right, let's see if this is going to advance. Okay, it's not. Okay, here we go. All right, so now it's going to be your turn to do some work. So I've shared with you several strategies that you can use to make science relevant to the culture and context of an audience. So what I'd like you to do is to choose a strategy. It could be making science practical and local, offering culturally similar role models, communicating science in an audience's language, finding common ground, connecting science to an audience's life experiences, or it could be your own, something that you've tried before, something that you're like, oh, hearing about all of this, here's something else that I think would work. Choose your own strategy, and then you are going to go back to the slide that we shared with you. And then in that box in the bottom, write down, what's the strategy, or better yet, brainstorm how you might apply that to to the story that you started to work on earlier in the workshop. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Oh, there you go. Laser interferometer gravitational wave observatory. Thank you. I should have looked up what that acronym meant, but I always forget. I'm like, I know this, and then I talk about it, and I'm like, nope, I don't, because those are too many fancy words for me. Okay, so I am going to give you some minutes. So I'm curious if there is a volunteer who would like to share. You know, how was it choosing your strategy? What did you choose? Why? Was it hard to come up with something? And you can use the chat or you can unmute yourself and share.
Well, I guess I can go.
Yes, do.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So I don't have outline per se, but just following the strategy and based on my research, I think I can make a practical sense in the way that I study, I improve models to study neurodegeneration, human in vitro models. And so I think that's by itself is very applicable to a lot of the audience because there is an increment of neurodegeneration. And also I can apply that to Hispanic, so I could apply that to the Hispanic population in the audience and make it personal as well, because part of the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing is because my sister has multiple sclerosis. So I think I have those 3 main pointers that I can use in this strategy to make it relatable and applicable.
Thank you so much. Is it Itzy?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Itzy. Yeah, I love that. I mean, you have multiple levels of connection, including your own. So thank you for sharing that about your sister. I appreciate you sharing something so personal. But you know, if you're comfortable doing that with an audience, that can really help people connect with you with why you're doing something, because it helps build empathy. It's relatable because probably they know someone, maybe not somebody that has MS, but maybe someone that has another neurological condition. So that is those are absolutely great ways to connect to an audience.
Yeah, the only thing that I think I need one needs to be careful is because on a personal level, I don't want to use it in a like dramatic emotional way, but it's just a link.
Yes, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, and like that is something that is an appropriate consideration. You know, like you don't want to trigger maybe someone in the audience or even yourself. Maybe if this is something that is really raw for you. I mean, I personally think it's just fine to share and show emotion, but some people are not comfortable with that. And so, yeah, it is definitely important to consider, you know, what may be appropriate to an audience, like what's appropriate to an audience. Maybe if you're talking to a patient group, you can tap into a different side of emotions where, you know, and that it's going to be different if you're talking to a group of researchers, or maybe you're talking to, I don't know, young people about doing neurodegeneration research. So you definitely have to adjust accordingly to your audience. And again, that is why going beyond, are they patients? Are they experts? Are they kids? But really thinking more deeply about what's their culture, what's their context, what's their identity, what is their life, what are their life experiences. Thinking about those things is really going to help you tailor what are the strategies and how do you share your messages with any given audience. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And you know, I was looking at the slides, and you all have some great stuff there. So I'm going to pass it back to T so that she can share some additional strategies, and then we can jump into a Q&A.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Monica. hold on, let me go back to the other view. I think one thing that I'll add to before going into the final like tips about presentations is that oftentimes convenience is a privilege, right? And also we maybe don't take the time to create slides or think about examples that might be relevant. Oh, thank you, Lauren. Yeah, I'll add the slides after. Thank you for that note. We don't often take the time because you're like, well, you know, this is probably the same, or, you know, it'll be good enough. And putting that extra care and time into your slides and into your examples really can make a difference in terms of inclusion and what the audience takes away from that. Like one example is whenever I was working with Denise on that series of the American Sign Language videos, in my head, naively, I was like, oh, you know, all these videos we're aiming, we told the funder we were going to make 2 to 3 minute videos. And inevitably, all the ASL videos were longer because we wanted to be able to show Denise signing and then doing the experiment. And so that was one thing. And then culturally, you know, I had suggested that we start with these are all the steps that we're going to do in the protocol. And she said, you know, I think that's a great idea. But if we're doing this according to true deaf culture, we like to have one step fully explained before we move on to the next step. So honoring and understanding the people that you're working with is going to be essential. And then, you know, the final note, you might have heard the voiceover on the videos. And that was one thing we asked Denise about. We said, do you want the voiceover? Typically, if it's going to be a deaf person who's listening or watching it, they won't, you know, hear the voice. And she's like, well, I won't hear it anyway, so it doesn't matter to me. But it might help people who are wanting to access the deaf culture more, understand it, or who are learning ASL. So she has a teaching heart as well. And so she's like, leave the audio up. So all of that was done in conversation. So as we close up and talk about other things, we know this was meant to be sort of like, here are some, you know, tips to get you started. We want to acknowledge that there's other tips as well, even in terms of the way you present and the way that you put your slides together. So some quick tips is that when you're thinking about delivery, they say there's studies that show an interesting engaging speakers are rated as engaging because they have vocal variety and they have vocal pacing. So vocal variety would be where you emphasize words or where you are slowing down, or like the pace, like slowing down or speeding up. Like if you're wanting to emphasize something, then you typically pause. And even that slight pause in, like, you're used to listening to somebody for 50 minutes, you're like, oh, wait, what is it? Oh, they're still talking, right? And one example that I do in an exercise is if I were to say, you know, I am a piano tuner. I'm here to check up on your piano today. And then if I'm not paying attention, I'm like, I'm sorry, did you say you're the gardener? They're like, no, I'm the piano tuner. And then what's done there is there's a pause and an emphasis. And so you don't want to do that. It gets tiring if you do that every slide. But if you indicate which slide is maybe critical for your context, if we look back at that picture, what was critical for your data, or something for the ending, and add a pause and some emphasis, that can help. Practice is the best way to be comfortable with the words that you're saying and to exclude filler words. If you find yourself saying a lot, or like, or you know, it's very typical, very common. The best way to kind of take that out of your speech is just pause. Just don't say the filler. And that takes practice, right? And so you'll just get a chance to think about it. There's no perfection in any sort of performance. It's just a chance to try something a little bit better next time. And then people say speakers who smile tend to be more engaging. But if that's not accessible to you, either in terms of personality or preference, then you can use enthusiastic words. Like, I'm excited to be here to share this with you. And so that's one way that can work. If you've got a prop like a pen, it can help to remind you to breathe, or when you're moving into different slides, you can just use that as a remember to breathe here. In terms of visuals, one of the easiest things you can do is just check your slide titles. Make sure that they are talking about the punchline, It's not a shorthand for you to remember what to say. The title is for the audience member to know what you're going to say. So remember that. And we have a series, iBiology, and as a part of the Science Communication Lab has a Share Your Research series. You can check out those videos about advice on slide titles. When you're thinking about colors that you use, be very intentional. A color should indicate a change in something or an importance of a variable or a factor. Don't use it just to make it pretty. And so be very intentional about the colors you use, and then arrows to make sure that they're pointing in a directional manner that is appropriate for the image. If you find that you're going in many circles that is now changing, and if you can, separate that into 2 slides. So think about directionality as you're using your arrows as well. And then finally, in terms of accessibility, consider the size of the font, the type of font, the size of the font, and the color that you use. Some are more accessible than others. There's great programs to check the accessibility of your slides. We also ask ahead of time, if you're in contact with your organizer, if there's anybody that has requested accommodations, would like slides in different languages beforehand, or large text, or with image descriptions. And so just being aware that that again might take extra time. So ask whoever you're going to speak at, ask if they have any requests for these kinds of accommodations, so you can prepare that for your slides ahead of time. Again, it's just that amount of care and thoughtfulness that knows the audience knows you're thinking about them too. So with that, we'll do the conclusion, because I've emphasized conclusions. And so when you're thinking about getting to the end of your slide and your talk, remember to call back to something at the beginning to say, remember how I said that this process was really unusual? Well, this is where we think we're going with it now. Or remember how I had introduced that this is something that everyone might see. We hope to be able to, whatever it is that your hope is. And so at the end of a talk, if at the end of a cooking show, you're used to them getting all the sensory things that you don't get to see because you're only visualizing it, but they tell you how it smells, they tell you how it looks, or you get to see how it looks, right? And they get to tell you how, it tastes. And so at the end of this, hopefully there has been some sensory information that you've been able to convey, been able to relate to the audience in a way that's meaningful to them, and doing it in a way that brings in a story and infuses what's important to you, because that's infectious. So in a good way. And Monica, any last words?
The mute button. No, I just wanted to, first, thank you all for your attention. Kavli for the invitation. Thank you for participating. And I'm going to share some links in the chat with like some of the videos that we've shared. I don't have the TED Talks and stuff, but you can maybe add them to either the document or the chat.
That sounds good.
But we'll share some stuff that has more information about effective communication, culturally relevant science communication. So some additional resources that you can look at on your own time.
Yeah, so we have the slide deck here that you all have accessible, and we'll share the other ones as well. Yeah, that was really fun. Thanks everybody for participating. At this point, if there's any questions that you have, we'll simulate that part of the talk where Monica and I are like packing up the podium, and if you have a question, you can let us know what you think.
Well, we definitely have some new DJ recommendations. So
Excellent.
yeah. I also always Google lo-fi hip hop. That's my grant writing soundtracks. But yeah, anybody have any questions before we head out?
I do have a question. It's a little bit unrelated to this seminar, but it's related to communication. Is there a particular link that you can suggest to prepare for a panel discussion? I've been watching videos and stuff like that. But is there something that you particularly like or think that is particularly useful?
We can share the Kavli SciComm Essentials library link with you, and we certainly have a lot of talks there. Some of the things that are off the top of my head might be like Lauren, do we have anything that has any media interview or, because I feel like a panel, you have to talk off the top of your head, right? So we might have a couple of, let us take a look at the library and we can send you, a
Yeah,
link.
we have at least one recorded media skills training, but that one you actually have to email me and I can send you the link. We don't have that one posted on the website. Everything else is, you just like click the button and go. But we can take a look, and when if you email me, I can send you some other options.
Thank
I
you.
might chip in something real quick too, is when you're thinking about a panel, I like to think about too, like why they might have invited you particularly and how you fill out the panel. And you can ask them that too, like why in particular, like what, were you hoping to accentuate, or the things that are important to you? Because at the end of the day, if you're in a panel at a conference, they're going to want to think, oh, they were the scientist that was A, B, and C, and then being able to use that as the foundation for your pitches so that they remember that, you're the neurodegenerative scientist who's interested in this kind of technique, and then being able to kind of highlight that would be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what I'll add is all the strategies that we've shared are applicable across different sorts of communication mediums. So really thinking deeply about who's your audience, their culture, their context, the context of the conference that you're presenting at. Thinking about your goals, and in this case, I agree with T, like asking the panel organizers, like where do I fit in the panel? I think the other thing that I like to do in panels is I think about panels as conversations. And so knowing who the other panelists are, what are the specific things that they bring, perspectives, expertise, whatnot, that they bring to the table, and then how are you different from that, or how might you complement what they bring to the table? Because you can think of a panel as like it's a puzzle, and so each panelist is like a different piece that like fits together. So trying to figure out where do you fit in that bigger picture of the panel and the panelists. But then, as T said, panels, you maybe are not as prepared. You may or may not be using slides, but thinking ahead of like, what are the questions that people may ask you? And then finally, if you've seen panels that you really enjoyed at conferences, think about like, what did they do really well that you liked, and how do you make that your own?
Thank you.
Much better advice than a link to a possible video that may or may not help you. So yes. Any
I'll
other
definitely
questions?
check out those links though.
Yeah. Any other questions? Well, some of them are you guys, so already. Couple minutes left, so just want to make sure we're giving you all the opportunity to connect with our experts.